Welcome to Learn English podcast every day. If you feel this video is helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Now let's start.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into some really interesting recent research news.
That's right. We've been looking at Science Daily, focusing on two big areas, cervical cancer and pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, pulling headlines and summaries from roughly the last year or so.
And our goal really is to sort of filter through all that information and pull out the key findings for you.
We want to give you a clear picture of where things stand, the progress, the ongoing challenges, and maybe some connections you wouldn't expect.
Definitely. So let's get started.
Okay, let's kick off with cervical cancer. It feels like there's some real positive momentum here, especially around prevention and screening.
Absolutely. One of the big things, I think, is the news about self-sampling for HPV.
Right, the study showing it's basically just as effective as the regular speculum test.
Exactly. And think about what that means for accessibility. It could be a huge deal for getting more people screened, people who maybe can't easily get to a clinic.
Yeah, that lowers a pretty significant barrier. And these self-tests are getting smarter too, it seems.
Mm-hmm. There was research back in December showing that the analysis of these tests can actually put HPV-positive individuals into 3 different risk categories.
Okay, so not just positive, negative, but like how positive or what kind of risk?
Sort of, yeah. It helps tailor the next steps, making the whole screening process potentially much more effective and efficient.
That makes a lot of sense. More targeted follow-up. And wasn't there mention of a whole new screening method as well?
Yes, back in June, a report highlighted a new, simpler method that apparently detects significantly more cancers than the current ones.
Wow. Significantly more.
That's what the summary suggested. Details weren't extensive, but definitely something to watch. Better detection is always the goal.
Absolutely. So better screening. And then there's the HPV vaccine story, which just seems incredibly positive.
It really is. That report from November about cervical cancer deaths plummeting in women under 25, that's almost certainly down to the vaccine rollout.
That's just amazing. Real-world impact right there. Proof that prevention works.
Undeniable proof. And it reinforces the idea that it's not just about vaccinated girls, is it?
No, the gender-neutral approach. Vaccinate everyone.
Exactly. A study confirmed that's the most effective strategy overall. Reduces the virus circulating in the whole population. Herd immunity in action.
Makes total sense. Cut off the transmission routes. And, okay, this sounds really cutting edge. A new type of vaccine.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Reported in August, a vaccine that aims to be both prophylactic, so preventative.
Stopping it before it starts.
Right. And therapeutic, meaning it could potentially help treat existing infections or precancerous lesions.
Whoa. So prevention and treatment in one.
Potentially, yes. That would be a massive leap forward if it pans out in further trials. A real game changer.
You're right. That's huge. And speaking of treating existing conditions, there's progress there too, beyond these new vaccine ideas.
A therapeutic HPV vaccine in a phase 2 trial actually showed it could cause regression in high-grade precancerous lesions.
So shrinking or reducing them without surgery.
That's the hope. Offering a less invasive option for those situations would be a really significant benefit for patients.
Definitely. And it's not always about brand new treatments either, is it? Sometimes it's about using what we have, but better.
Precisely. Research from October showed that just optimizing the timing and use of existing drugs before chemoradiation can improve survival and lower recurrence rates in cervical cancer.
So the sequence matters a lot.
It really does. Fine-tuning those treatment protocols is critical.
Okay, shifting slightly. Our basic understanding of HPV keeps evolving too, and some surprising links are emerging, or at least links people aren't aware of.
Yeah, the throat cancer connection. The finding that HPV causes something like 70% of throat cancers? That's a huge number.
70%. And yet,
only about a third of the public knows about this link. That's a massive awareness gap.
It really is. Think of the implications for prevention if more people understood that.
Absolutely. And we're also digging deeper into why HPV persists in some people.
The genetic risk factors.
Right. Research identified new genetic markers linked to persistent infections. Knowing who's genetically more susceptible could, down the line, lead to more personalized prevention strategies.
Tailoring things based on individual risk. Makes sense. Okay, before we dive into pancreatic cancer, which is often a tougher story, some good news overall.
Yes, it's worth noting the broader context. The January report showed overall cancer mortality rates are still declining. That's positive.
Definitely good to hear.
And another report specifically credited improvements in prevention and screening, including for cervical cancer, for saving lives across several cancer types.
So these efforts like HPV vaccination and better screening are really adding up.
They absolutely are.
Yeah.
And, another study reminded us that a big chunk of cancer cases and deaths are tied to things we can actually change, modifiable risk factors.
Lifestyle, environment, things we have some control over. Always important to remember. Okay, let's pivot. Pancreatic cancer. As you said, often a much tougher outlook.
Unfortunately, yeah. That very low 5-year survival rate statistic is always sobering. It just highlights how urgently we need breakthroughs.
It really does. But there is research happening, lots of it, especially focused on early detection, right? Because that's so critical here.
Exactly. If you can catch it earlier, the chances are just so much better. And there are several interesting angles here.
Like figuring out which pancreatic cysts are actually dangerous.
Right. Research looking at detecting specific invasive nodules within cysts. The idea is to avoid unnecessary major surgery for cysts that are probably benign. Refining that diagnosis is key.
Better precision, fewer unnecessary interventions, and blood tests. That always sounds like the holy grail for cancers like this.
It really is a major focus. There was a report on a new blood test showing, I think, 85% accuracy in identifying pancreatic cancer, even the hard-to-detect cases.
85%? That's really promising.
It is. And another experimental blood test is actually moving into commercial evaluation. So these are inching closer to maybe being used in the clinic.
Moving from the lab to reality. That's fantastic news. And technology is playing a role too, AI.
Yeah, AI tools are being developed to help with diagnostics, even classifying different subtypes of pancreatic cancer.
Subtypes. So understanding the specific kind of cancer someone has.
Exactly. Which could eventually help pick the best treatment for that specific subtype. More personalized medicine.
That seems to be a theme across the board. Still, it's concerning to hear that even staging early pancreatic cancer is often inaccurate.
It is. It just underlines why we desperately need these better diagnostic tools. The blood tests, the AI, better imaging. Accurate staging is fundamental for planning treatment.
Absolutely crucial. Okay, so what about new treatments? What's happening on the therapeutic side?
Lots of different strategies being explored. One really interesting one targets something called transcription replication conflicts.
Okay, break that down a bit.
Basically, cancer cells multiply so fast, they make mistakes when copying their DNA. It creates stress within the cell. This approach tries to exploit that vulnerability, that internal stress, to kill the cancer cells.
Attacking a fundamental process where the cancer cell is already struggling. Clever.
It seems like a promising angle. And then there's the idea of combining therapies, like immunotherapy, with targeted drugs.
Right, boosting the effect.
Yeah, specifically boosting KRAS-targeted therapy. KRAS mutations are super common in pancreatic cancer, but notoriously hard to drug. Preclinical work suggests adding immunotherapy might make those KRAS drugs work much better.
That synergy could be really powerful, hitting the cancer from multiple directions. And we're seeing positive signs in animal models for completely new treatments, too.
We are. There was one report of a new treatment shrinking and even clearing tumors in mice. Another highlighted new antibodies targeting a protein called CKAP4, which seems important for tumor growth.
So promising early results that hopefully translate.
And that's always the hope. These are crucial first steps. And even things like diet are being looked at.
The ketogenic diet study.
Yeah, in mice, a keto diet seemed to improve how well they responded to pancreatic cancer therapy. It suggests metabolism might play a role we could potentially leverage.
Interesting. So maybe influencing the body's environment could help the treatments work better. And speaking of the environment, researchers are looking beyond the cancer cells themselves, right? At the surrounding tissue.
Definitely. There's growing interest in the tumor microenvironment. One study targeted a protein called galectin-1 in the fibroblasts. Those are connective tissue cells around the tumor.
And why target those?
Because these activated fibroblasts often help the tumor grow. So if you can target them, you might disrupt the tumor support system.
Attack the ecosystem, not just the invader. Makes sense. And our basic understanding of the tumor biology is still yielding surprises, too.
Absolutely. Like the discovery of a different type of connective tissue cell that actually seems to fight tumor development.
Wow. So some cells in the neighborhood are actually trying to help.
It seems so. Understanding how to maybe boost those helpful cells could be a whole new therapeutic avenue.
That's fascinating. And technology is helping us see these tumors better, too. DNA origami.
Yeah, using nanotechnology, literally folding DNA into shapes to improve imaging and help define tumor margins more clearly for surgery. Really intricate stuff.
Incredible. And this idea of cellular memory. that pancreatic cells can remember pre-cancerous changes even without genetic mutations.
That's a mind-bender, isn't it? It suggests cancer development might start even earlier, with these epigenetic marks like chemical tags on the DNA setting the stage before the genes themselves mutate.
Deepens our understanding of those very first steps, and specific culprits are still being identified, like enzymes driving growth.
Right, an enzyme called McCall2 was pinpointed as promoting growth and spread, another potential target.
So many potential targets emerging, and these organoids seem important too, miniature tumors in the lab.
They're incredibly valuable. They let researchers study the complex mix of cells in pancreatic cancer in a 3D structure that's much more realistic than flat cells in a dish. Great for testing drugs.
Like a mini battleground for research. And finally, more insights into those RAS proteins, the common drivers.
Yeah, uncovering new ways mutant RAS fuels tumor growth. Understanding RAS better is absolutely critical because it's involved in so many difficult-to-treat cancers, especially pancreatic.
Okay, so pulling it all together, despite the challenges, there's a huge amount of work going on across both these cancers.
There really is. And you see common threads, don't you? The massive push for earlier, smarter detection is clear in both.
Definitely. And the power of prevention, especially with the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer, is undeniable.
And the need to understand the deep biology, the tumor, its environment, the genetics, the epigenetics, that's fundamental to finding better therapies for both.
Immunotherapy keeps popping up as well, often in combination with other approaches.
Yeah, harnessing the immune system, potentially making other treatments work better. That seems like a major area of focus across cancer research.
And tech like AI and organoids are becoming standard tools.
Right. But we have to acknowledge, especially with pancreatic cancer, the challenges are still immense. Even with overall cancer death rates falling, some cancers remain incredibly difficult. Absolutely. It just highlights why the research needs to continue, why innovation is so vital. We're making progress, but there's still a long way to go.
So recapping our deep dive for cervical cancer, really positive strides in prevention and screening, self-sampling, vaccine impact, even therapeutic vaccines look promising.
A lot of encouraging developments there.
For pancreatic cancer, it's tougher, but there's intense focus on cracking early detection with blood tests and AI, exploring combination therapies, immunotherapy, and really digging into the basic biology to find new weaknesses.
A multi-pronged attack on a very complex disease. And you really see how basic science, new tech, and public health strategies all have to work together.
That interconnectedness is key. Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with. We've seen this clear link established between a virus, HPV, and cervical cancer, and we're learning so much about the subtle early changes in pancreatic cancer. It makes you wonder, what other connections are out there? What other seemingly unrelated things in our lives, our environment, our biology might turn out to have a really significant impact on cancer risk or development down the road?
That's a great question. Future research might uncover some really surprising links we just don't see yet.
Exactly. Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.